Nobody handed me a list when I realized that my kids were neurodivergent. I figured most of this out by watching what made the hard moments shorter and what made them worse. So today I'm going to walk you through what we actually use in our house. Not a perfect system, just real things that help. I'm Maryellen, and I share practical support for neurodivergent families when everyday life feels harder than it should. This is part of my Parenting Neurodivergent Kids series, and this one is probably the most practical video in the whole series. We've talked about why neurodivergent brains work differently, executive function, sensory needs, regulation, but today is about what you can actually do. The tools and supports we reach for in our house, why they work, and how we use them. Okay, let's get started. Why supports work. The quick version. Before I get into the specifics, I want to say this once because it matters. Using supports is not lowering the bar. It's not giving up on skills. It's replacing something that the brain doesn't automatically generate with an external tool that does the same job. A neurotypical brain generates internal reminders, tracks time, initiates tasks, and self-regulates with a lot less scaffolding. A neurodivergent brain needs those things to come from the outside. That's what supports do. They're not a crutch. They're an accommodation for how the brain is actually wired. Okay, let's get into the good stuff. Visual supports. Visuals work because they do not rely on working memory. The information is just there in the environment without anyone having to remember or remind or be reminded out loud. In our house, visuals show up in a lot of different ways. My kids use morning routine charts, so the sequence of the morning isn't something anyone has to think about or negotiate. It's just on their door. Same with the chart that my son uses to track his protein intake. It hangs right by his chair at the kitchen table, so it's in his line of sight when he's going to sit down to eat. He doesn't have to remember to track it. It's just there. Post-its are everywhere, especially in my schoolroom, but they can be anywhere we need them to be. Small visual cues in the right place, in the right location, at the right moment, do a lot of the heavy lifting. And visual timers are huge for time blindness. Watching time physically disappear, seeing the red section go down, or in our case with our big visual timer, the rainbow, is so much more concrete than being told 5 more minutes. 5 more minutes means nothing to a brain that does not track time well. Seeing it is different. Alarms and routines. My phone is essentially the executive function that I outsource. I have alarms for waking up, medication administration for my kids, when to leave for appointments, nap times, taking out the trash, when to pay certain bills, phone calls that I need to make, and even the tooth fairy, because I will absolutely forget. And I want to make a distinction here between a routine and a strict schedule, because I think this trips up parents a lot when they're told that their day needs to be more structured. A strict schedule says, we do math at 9 a.m. A routine says, math comes after breakfast and before reading. The flow is the same every day, but it's not locked by a clock. That flexibility matters, especially when mornings go long or someone needs extra time to regulate before we can start anything. Now, if it's leaving for an appointment, then that does need to be a specific time. And that's where the alarms come in to help me get out the door on time. But overall, familiar flow is what we're going for. It's the predictability without having to be so rigid. Sensory and body-based supports. The body needs to regulate before anything else works. I talked about this in my regulation video earlier in my series, and it shows up practically here. When one of mine is climbing the furniture and is restless, that's my cue to redirect to the trampoline before we try to go any further with our day. Getting that sensory output done first makes everything after that easier. And some may feel like the trampoline is rewarding disruptive behavior, but it's not a reward. It's a regulation tool that we use proactively. Weighted blankets are something that can be helpful, and my kids will reach for them when they're tired or they're overwhelmed or need to calm down. And blankets in general, especially nice fuzzy blankets. My kids are always wrapped up to have something soft. That deep pressure is genuinely calming for their nervous systems. Also, food is one that many people underestimate. Neurodivergent kids tend to be more vulnerable to blood sugar drops affecting their mood and regulation. If a kid is melting down and I can't identify why, food is one of the first things that I check, because I know how much food can affect how I feel myself. A snack has ended more than a few spirals in our house. Headphones for sound sensitivity. We talked about this in my sensory video, but having them accessible and not making a big deal about using them normalizes it. Go-to players and music are also big for us in our family. Familiar audio, an audiobook, a playlist that they love can be regulating and calming. It's very easy to offer and for the kids to access independently. And sometimes what's needed is physical. Hugging, rocking, deep pressure. When one of mine was younger and dysregulating hard, sometimes what helped was holding him close and rocking. The nervous system responds to that. Teaching deep breathing without a battle. I'll be honest, telling a dysregulated kid to take a deep breath is usually not very effective and can often incite the opposite response that we're looking for. They're not in a place to hear it or do it on purpose. But if you practice certain things when they are regulated, hopefully they can use these tools when they're dysregulated. And blowing bubbles can be a fun way to take slow, deep breaths. Kids will do it without thinking of it as a calming strategy, which means they'll actually do it. Another one that sometimes works, especially when they're young, is pretending that a balloon is about to deflate because it's kind of silly. Sometimes imagery of blowing out candles can be helpful as well. Again, practicing these things when they are regulated helps for in the moments when they're not regulated. So the bigger picture here, here's what I want to leave you with. Some of these supports are things that we'll likely do forever. Some of them are just scaffolding, temporary structures that build a skill until that skill doesn't need that support anymore. My goal is never to keep my kids dependent on external supports. My goal is regulation, skill building, and confidence. And sometimes that takes longer than we want. But every support that we put in place is buying time for their nervous system to develop, and that time matters. I'm Maryellen. Thanks for being here. If this made you feel a little less alone, subscribing is a simple way to stay connected to support like this. The full Parenting Neurodivergent Kids playlist is linked in the description below. Next in the series, we're going into school struggles and learning differences, why effort doesn't always equal outcome, and how to identify what your child actually needs. I'll see you there.